The message arrived not with a bang. The sky over Geneva had never looked so heavy. It wasn't raining, but the air felt thick, like the whole world was holding its breath. Inside the United Nations Interplanetary Affairs Chamber, a room built only 5 years earlier after the first confirmed contact, the usual hum of translators and diplomats had gone silent. Every delegate sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the central platform where the V3 envoy stood. They weren't human. Not even close. Tall, with skin like polished obsidian and voices that resonated more in your bones than your ears, the V3 had arrived 10 months ago, offering guidance. They spoke of unity, progress, and galactic order. Humanity, desperate to prove it belonged among the stars, signed every agreement they proposed: trade routes, resource sharing, even joint defense protocols. Countries set aside old rivalries. For the first time in history, Earth acted as one voice. But today, that voice was about to break. The V3 envoy tilted its head, a gesture humans had learned meant amusement. "Your species," it said, its tone smooth but edged with something sharp, "is like a child playing with fire in a dry forest. You burn yourselves, then beg others to put out the flames." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. The words were harsh, but not unheard of. Diplomacy between species was still new. Clumsy. Then came the real blow. "You petitioned for membership in the Galactic Concord," the envoy continued, its voice now echoing through the chamber like cold metal scraping stone. "Yet your planet remains fractured. Your wars continue in shadow. Your leaders lie to their own people. You are not ready. You may never be." It paused, letting the insult settle. "In fact," it added, almost casually, "we've reviewed your cultural output, your films, your music, your so-called art. It is primitive noise. Your science is borrowed. Your courage is performative. You call yourselves explorers, yet you fear your own oceans, your own minds." A murmur rippled through the room. This wasn't criticism. This was mockery. Public, deliberate, and cruel. Back in mission control centers, newsrooms, and government war rooms across the globe, people watched live feeds with growing disbelief. In Nairobi, a technician dropped his coffee cup. In Jakarta, a teenager paused her game and stared at the screen. In Buenos Aires, an old man whispered, "They think we're nothing." But the worst part came next. The envoy turned slightly toward the human representative, a seasoned diplomat who'd spent 30 years building bridges, and said, "You may keep your little planet. We will not return. And tell your children, when the stars speak, Earth should learn to listen or disappear." Then, without another word, the V3 delegation walked out. Their ship lifted silently from the landing pad outside, vanishing into the clouds within seconds. For 3 full minutes, no one in the chamber moved. Then the human delegate stood. She didn't speak. She just removed the silver pin from her lapel, the symbol of Earth's provisional membership in the Concord, and placed it gently on the table. One by one, other delegates did the same. Within the hour, emergency calls went out to every capital. In Washington, the president gathered her cabinet. In Beijing, the premier convened an emergency session. In Brussels, New Delhi, Cairo, Brasilia leaders who hadn't agreed on anything in decades found themselves staring at the same footage, feeling the same quiet fury. This wasn't about pride. It was about dignity. By nightfall, a message began circulating, not through official channels, but through secure military scientific networks. Short, clear, final. All treaties with extraterrestrial entities are hereby suspended. Effective immediately. No exceptions. No speeches. No warnings. Just action. People around the world didn't see it coming. One moment, humanity was begging for a seat at the galactic table. The next, it slammed the door shut. In Tokyo, engineers powered down the alien-designed comes array. In Norway, scientists sealed the data vault containing shared Vathari knowledge. In Chile, astronomers redirected telescopes away from known Vathari transit routes. It wasn't revenge. It was refusal. Refusal to be laughed at. Refusal to beg for respect. Refusal to pretend that kindness would earn them a place among beings who saw them as insects. Ordinary people felt it too. A factory worker in Detroit told his son, "We don't need their stars if they think we're trash." A teacher in Manila canceled her lesson on interstellar cooperation and instead asked her students, "What makes us human?" A fisherman in Kerala looked up at the night sky and said nothing, but tightened his grip on his net, as if reminding himself what was real. No one declared war. No one fired a shot. But something changed that day. Humanity stopped looking outward for validation. It turned inward, not in fear, but in focus. If the galaxy thought they were weak, disorganized, noisy, fine. Let them think that. Because what the Vathari didn't understand was this: humans didn't need permission to be great. They'd climbed mountains, crossed oceans, split atoms, and walked on the moon, all while fighting each other. Now, united not by love, but by a shared wound. They remembered who they were, and somewhere, deep in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, a team of linguists and physicists began working on something new, not to talk to aliens, but to build something entirely human, something the galaxy had never seen. The night ended not with anger, but with quiet resolve. Earth had been mocked, but it hadn't broken, and tomorrow? Tomorrow, it would begin again on its own terms. The morning after the council incident, silence hung over Earth like fog. Not the peaceful kind. This was heavy, electric. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. But in that quiet, something strange began to happen. Across cities and villages, people started showing up, not to protest, not to panic, but to do. In Berlin, engineers gathered at an old aerospace lab, dusting off blueprints humans had abandoned when alien tech promised easier answers. In Mumbai, students pulled textbooks on classical physics from library shelves, pages yellowed but full of human-made knowledge. In rural Kenya, farmers shared satellite maps they'd once ignored, now studying them with fresh eyes, wondering what their own land could teach them. No one gave orders. No global announcement told them to act. It just spread. Like a whisper passed from neighbor to neighbor. We don't need them. Governments move fast, but carefully. All joint projects with the Vathari were frozen. Not destroyed, just paused. Data wasn't erased. It was archived, labeled for review. The alien comms towers? Powered down but left standing. Humanity wasn't burning bridges. It was stepping back to see if the bridges were even worth crossing. Meanwhile, scientists met in secret video calls, voices low but urgent. "Their math," one said. "It's elegant, yes, but it skips steps. Like they assume certain truths we've never proven." Another chimed in. "Their energy systems rely on materials we can't replicate. Maybe they wanted us dependent." A third added quietly, "Or maybe they just didn't think we'd notice." That was the real shift. People stopped assuming alien equals superior. They started asking questions. Schools changed too. Teachers stopped showing glossy Vathari educational reels. Instead, they played recordings of Apollo missions, showed grainy footage of the first internet message, read aloud letters from inventors who failed 100 times before succeeding. Kids began asking, "What did we build?" Not, "What can they give us?" In hospitals, doctors revisited old research on human resilience, how bodies heal, how minds adapt. They realized much of their recent medical progress had leaned on Vathari bioscanners that diagnosed everything instantly. But those scanners never explained why. Now, teams went back to basics. Blood samples, observation, trial and error. Slow? Yes. Human? Absolutely. Even artists felt it. Musicians stopped trying to mimic the harmonic frequencies the Vethari called true sound. A guitarist in Lisbon strummed a broken chord and smiled. "It's messy," he said, "but it's mine." Painters use real pigments again, not light-projected illusions. Writers filled notebooks with stories about ordinary courage, not galactic heroes, but nurses, bus drivers. Grandparents who remembered how to fix things with tape and hope. Back at the UN chamber, diplomats didn't meet for days. When they finally did, there were no speeches. Just a simple agreement. Earth would speak with one voice, but only about Earth. No more begging for inclusion. No more pretending unity for show. If they were going to stand together, it had to be real, not just for aliens watching, but for themselves. Then came the first test. A week after the treaty cancellations, a deep space monitoring station in Antarctica picked up a signal. Not from the Vethari, from another species, unknown, distant. The message was short, repeating every 12 hours. "Who speaks for Earth?" Panic flickered for a moment. Should they respond? Ignore it? Pretend they hadn't heard? But this time, they didn't rush. They debated. Scientists, linguists, philosophers, even poets joined the discussion. After 3 days, they sent a reply not through alien channels, but using rebuilt human radio arrays, powered by solar grids humans had designed decades ago. The message was simple. We do. One planet. Many voices. Listening. No grand claims. No boasts. Just truth. The response stunned observers. It wasn't flashy. It didn't try to impress. But it was honest. And for the first time, it felt like Earth wasn't trying to be something it wasn't at night. People looked up at the stars again, but differently. Not with longing, not with fear. With curiosity, yes, but also caution. They remembered the taunt. You fear your own oceans. So divers returned to deep-sea labs. Oceanographers mapped trenches with homegrown sonar. Fishermen shared old tales of strange currents, knowledge passed down, not downloaded in homes. Families talked more. Not about aliens, but about each other. Parents asked kids what they wanted to invent. Grandparents told stories of blackouts, wars, pandemics, times when humans had only themselves to rely on. And somehow, those stories felt more valuable than any alien database. There were setbacks, of course. A power grid in South America faltered when it lost access to Vethori stabilizers. Engineers worked 36 hours straight, rewiring old systems, jury-rigging solutions from scrap. When the lights came back on, the whole town cheered, not because it was perfect, but because they fixed it. No one declared victory. No one claimed humanity was better than the Vethari. But a quiet pride grew, not loud, not angry, just steady. Like roots pushing through stone and deep in that Swiss bunker, the team working on the new project made a breakthrough. Not a weapon, not a message. A language one, built from human patterns, human rhythms, human mistakes. Something no alien could fully understand, because it was born from being beautifully, stubbornly imperfect. Earth hadn't won a war. It hadn't conquered space. But it had done something harder. It had chosen itself. And that, more than any treaty or technology, was the beginning of something real. 3 weeks after the treaties ended, Earth didn't feel broken. It felt awake. The first real sign came from the skies. Not alien ships, but human ones. Old launch pads that had gathered dust for years suddenly hummed with activity. In Kazakhstan, workers rolled out a rocket built entirely with pre-contact designs. No borrowed tech, no alien alloys. It wasn't sleek or silent like Vethari craft. It roared like thunder as it lifted off, shaking windows 50 miles away. People cheered not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. That same week, A group of teenagers in Canada rebuilt a weather satellite using parts scavenged from decommissioned labs. They launched it on a repurposed drone platform, and when its signal blinked to life over the Arctic, their teacher cried. Not from sadness, from relief. Humanity hadn't forgotten how to reach upward on its own. Down on the ground, cities began changing too. Without access to Vathari energy grids, some neighborhoods faced rolling blackouts. But instead of waiting for a fix from above, communities banded together. Rooftops filled with solar panels cobbled from old phone chargers and car batteries. In São Paulo, neighbors shared power through hand-wired microgrids. A retired electrician in Manila taught kids how to rewire streetlights using bicycle dynamos. It wasn't efficient, but it worked. And more importantly, it connected people. Schools became hubs of rediscovery. History classes no longer glossed over the messy parts, wars, mistakes, failed experiments. Teachers said, "This is who we are." Flawed, but trying. Science labs smelled of solder and ozone again, as students built radios from scratch. Tested water purity with homemade kits, even grew food in recycled soda bottles under LED lights, powered by hand cranks. Learning wasn't about getting the right answer fast. It was about understanding the question deeply. And then there was the music. After the council incident, streaming platforms saw a strange shift. Downloads of human-made songs, real instruments, raw vocals, imperfect recordings spiked worldwide. A folk singer in Ireland recorded an album in her kitchen using a 100-year-old guitar. A choir in Nairobi sang in harmonies passed down through generations. No digital tuning, just voices rising together. People weren't just listening, they were feeling. Because for the first time in years, the sound wasn't polished to please outsiders. It was honest. Governments stayed quiet, but they were watching. Intelligence agencies noticed something odd. Global tensions between nations had dropped. Not because of peace treaties, but because everyone was too busy fixing things at home. Border disputes paused as engineers from rival countries quietly shared schematics for water purifiers. Former enemies exchanged data on crop resilience, not weapons. The enemy wasn't each other anymore, it was helplessness. And no one wanted to feel helpless again. Then came the day the oceans answered back. A research vessel off the coast of Chile, funded by a coalition of fishing villages, sent a live feed to every major news outlet. They deployed a deep-sea probe built from old submarine parts and open-source code. At 3,000 meters down, it found something. A new species of bioluminescent jellyfish, pulsing in patterns that looked almost like language. Scientists didn't rush to call it alien-like. They called it Earth's, and they protected the coordinates so no corporation could claim it. That night, millions watched the gentle glow ripple across their screens. No grand announcement, no galactic significance. Just life strange, beautiful, and entirely homegrown. Back in Geneva, the UN chamber held its first full session since the fallout. This time, no one wore ceremonial pins. No one quoted alien doctrines. A delegate from a small island nation stood and said simply, "We spent years trying to prove we belonged among the stars. Maybe we forgot to protect what makes us worth belonging." No applause followed. Just silence, and then a slow nod from every corner of the room. Meanwhile, in homes across the planet, ordinary routines took on new meaning. A mother teaching her child to bake bread said, "This recipe survived wars. It'll survive anything." A mechanic in Detroit welded a car engine back to life and muttered, "They said we needed their parts." Guess they were wrong. An elderly woman in Vietnam planted rice using methods her grandmother taught her, whispering, "The land remembers us, even when the sky forgets." There were still hard days. Power outages, supply shortages, moments of doubt. But something had shifted in the way people faced them. Instead of asking, what would the Vathari do? They asked, what can we do? And the answer was always the same. Try again. Try together. Try with whatever you have. Deep in the Swiss bunker, the Human Language Project reached a milestone. The team sent a test pulse, not into deep space, but to every continent at once. It carried no words, just rhythms. A heartbeat, rainfall, a lullaby hummed off key, the crackle of a campfire. Receivers picked it up in labs, schools, even rural clinics. People didn't understand it with their minds. They felt it in their bones. It wasn't meant for aliens. It was a message to themselves. We are still here. We are still human. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. 4 months had passed since Earth walked away from the galactic table, and the world didn't just survive, it began to hum again, in its own key. Cities glowed differently now. Not with the cold, steady light of alien power cores, but with flickering LEDs, candlelit windows, and the warm orange of wood stoves in places that hadn't used them in generations. People weren't just coping, they were creating. In Cairo, a group of engineers turned old washing machines into water purifiers. In Oslo, teenagers rigged wind turbines from bicycle parts and mounted them on rooftops. Nothing looked sleek or futuristic, but everything worked. And more than that, it belonged. The biggest surprise came from space itself. After canceling all joint missions, humanity's space programs didn't collapse. They refocused. Instead of chasing distant stars for approval, they turned their eyes closer to the moon, to Mars, to the silent rocks drifting near Earth. A small team in Argentina launched a probe using repurposed satellite hardware and open-source navigation software. It wasn't fast, but it was precise. When it sent back images of a near-Earth asteroid rich in rare metals, governments didn't rush to claim it. Scientists from 12 countries shared the data freely. This isn't about ownership, one said during a live broadcast. It's about learning what our corner of space can give us on our terms. Down below, classrooms buzzed with a kind of excitement not seen in decades. Kids weren't just memorizing facts, they were building things. A school in rural Thailand powered its lights with banana peels and methane digesters. In Poland, students coded weather prediction models using only publicly available data and old laptops. Teachers stopped saying, "One day you'll work with aliens." Now they said, "One day you'll show the universe what humans can do alone." And people listened not to broadcasts from distant councils, but to each other. Community centers became innovation hubs. Retired engineers taught soldering. Grandparents showed how to grow food without chemicals. Artists held workshops on making paint from berries and clay. There was no grand plan, no central command. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Remember skills that had been forgotten in the rush to advance. Then came the quiet revolution in medicine, without Vathari bioscanners that diagnosed illness in seconds, but offered no understanding. Doctors returned to observation, conversation, and patience. Hospitals revived old practices, tracking fevers by hand, studying how patients moved, listening to breathing patterns. A clinic in Ghana combined traditional herbal knowledge with modern sanitation methods and cut infection rates by half. In Canada, researchers rediscovered a 1980s study on immune resilience that had been buried under flashy alien tech, and it worked better than expected. No miracle cures. No instant fixes. Just careful, human care. Even entertainment changed. Streaming services filled with documentaries about real explorers, people who crossed deserts on foot, mapped uncharted rivers, decoded ancient scripts by candlelight. Fictional shows shifted too. Heroes weren't chosen by destiny or gifted by aliens. They were teachers, farmers, mechanics, ordinary people solving problems with grit and teamwork. Audiences loved them because they felt true. Back at the UN, something unexpected happened. Trust grew. Not because leaders suddenly agreed on everything, but because they'd faced the same humiliation and chose dignity over division. Trade deals were rewritten not to impress outsiders, but to support local economies. Environmental treaties were strengthened, not for galactic reputation, but because clean air and water mattered to children playing outside. One evening, a live feed showed a simple scene: a village in Nepal installing its first solar-powered water pump built entirely from local materials, designed by a collective of villagers and visiting engineers. No flags, no speeches, just hands working together as the sun set behind the mountains. Millions watched. No one commented. They just felt it, the quiet pride of doing something real. Meanwhile, the deep space signal from the unknown species continued. Every 12 hours, like clockwork. Who speaks for Earth? Humanity still hadn't given a full reply. But this time, they weren't rushing. Linguists, poets, scientists, and even children were crafting responses, not in one voice, but in many. A fisherman's song, a mathematician's equation, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the laughter of friends sharing a meal, all woven into a single transmission, scheduled to launch in 2 weeks. It wouldn't be perfect. It might not even be understood, but it would be honest. And then, late one night, a message arrived not from the unknown species, but from somewhere else entirely. A faint repeating pulse hidden in cosmic background noise. At first, scientists thought it was interference. Then they realized it was a pattern. Simple, repetitive, familiar. It matched the rhythm of the human heartbeat. No one knew if it was a coincidence, a natural phenomenon, or something else. But for a moment, the whole planet held its breath, because maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't waiting for perfection. Maybe it was waiting for truth. And Earth, messy and loud and stubbornly alive, was finally ready to speak it. 1 year after the council chamber fell silent, Earth did not look the same, but not because it had changed its face. It had changed its heart. The day began like any other. Fishermen hauled nets under a rising sun. Bakers pulled bread from ovens built with brick and patience. Children walked to schools where chalk dust still floated in morning light. But something hummed beneath the ordinary, a quiet certainty that had grown slowly, like roots through stone. That morning, the transmission launched. Not from a gleaming alien spire, but from a field in New Zealand where farmers had helped build a radio array from recycled satellite dishes and copper wire. The signal carried no demands, no boasts, just sounds. A baby's first cry in a Tokyo hospital. The rhythm of hammers rebuilding a bridge in Peru. An old man in Greece telling a story to his grandchildren. The wind across the Sahara. A violinist playing alone on a fire escape in Chicago as rain began to fall. All woven together, not as a performance, but as a portrait. This is who we are. This is what we protect. Hours later, a reply came. Not from the Vethuri. They had vanished, their silence speaking louder than their taunts ever had. This message came from the unknown species, the one that had asked again and again, "Who speaks for Earth?" Their response was simple: "We hear you now." No explanation, no invitation, just acknowledgement. And for the first time, humanity didn't ache for more. They had sent their truth. That was enough. In Geneva, the UN chamber gathered not for ceremony, but for work. Delegates spoke of ocean cleanup projects, seed banks restored, power grids rebuilt by hand. No one mentioned the stars unless to say, "We'll return when we're ready," not when we're invited. The conversation wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about tending to what mattered. And what mattered was here. Cities had softened at the edges. Rooftop gardens spilled over concrete. Streets once choked with vehicles now held benches where elders taught children. how to whittle wood or identify constellations without apps. People walked more, talked more, listened more. Without alien tech smoothing every rough edge, life had become harder in small ways, but richer in ways that stuck. A young woman in Mexico City stood before a crowd, not as a leader, but as a neighbor. She held up a small device, a water filter made from clay and charcoal, designed by her grandmother. "They called us primitive," she said, more steady. "But this keeps children alive." What's primitive about that? No one cheered. They simply nodded, because they understood. Value wasn't measured by how far you reached into space, but by how deeply you cared for the ground beneath your feet. That evening, something unexpected happened across the planet. People stepped outside not to look up, but to look around. At their streets, their trees, their neighbors lighting candles on porches as dusk settled. No one organized it. It just happened. A quiet moment of shared presence. A fisherman in Norway stood on his dock watching the northern lights ripple green and gold. A teacher in Kenya sat with students under a baobab tree, pointing out stars humans had named long before aliens arrived. A mechanic in Detroit wiped grease from his hands and watched fireflies blink in an overgrown lot where a factory once stood. They weren't waiting for anything anymore. The Vathery's taunt had cut deep. You fear your own oceans. But in the years since, submarines built by Indonesian engineers had mapped trenches no alien ship ever visited. Divers from the Philippines had discovered coral formations that pulsed with light in patterns no database could explain. And when a storm threatened Pacific Islands, it wasn't alien shields that protected them. It was seawalls built by hand, designed using tidal knowledge passed down through generations. Humanity hadn't become perfect. Arguments still flared. Mistakes still happened. Power still failed on cold nights. But the fear had lifted, the fear of not being enough. Because enough wasn't a galactic rating. It was a full stomach. A healed wound. A story told before bed. A hand held in silence. Deep in the Swiss bunker, the team finally powered down their project. The human language pulse had served its purpose, not to talk to aliens, but to remind Earth of its own voice. One researcher packed her bag and walked outside. As dawn broke over the Alps, she breathed air that smelled of pine and wet stone. No translation needed. No approval required. Years later, historians would struggle to name what happened that year. It wasn't a war, not a revolution, not even a movement with banners and slogans. It was quieter than that. It was the day humanity stopped apologizing for being human. The stars still glittered overhead, distant and indifferent. But Earth no longer looked to them for permission to shine. And somewhere, in 1,000 small moments, a shared meal, a repaired roof, a child learning to ride a bike without training wheels, humanity proved something the Vethery never understood. Dignity isn't given. It's chosen. Again and again. In the dark. With dirty hands and tired hearts and stubborn hope. The Council had taunted Earth, but Earth had answered not with weapons or words, but with life itself. Messy, fragile, beautiful life. And that was a language no galaxy could ever silence.